computer. Okay. So before we talk about today's discussion problems, I want to give you guys the list of equations that you need to know before review the question. And after knowing the equations, firstly, we are going to have some questions related to the calculation, and then the rest questions would be based on the definitions. So first part, equations. Second part, questions based on these equations. And third part, we are going to have look at some definition problems. Okay. So first of all, let's list these equations. So the first equation that you need to memorize is that yd equals y subtract t. So do not worry about this because yd just represents the disposal income and y, and you already know that y is the income, right? Income, and this is disposal income, and t is tax. So actually this equation, you can understand it based on your real life because after getting your salary, you need to pay the tax, right? And after paying the tax, the rest of money that you can use for your consumption, for your saving, or for your consumption saving, okay? And next equation that you need to memorize is our old friend, okay? Y equals C plus I plus G. So do you remember what does these things mean? Also, Y means income or output, right? And C, consumption. I, investment or saving. Actually, personally, for our personal account, it will be saving, right? And G, government spending or government purchases. So the second equation is our old friend, but do you remember that last session we talked about the import subtract export, right? But in these two chapters, we are not going to talk about the open economy. We are going to talk about the closed economy without foreign transaction. So we just eliminate these two things. And the third one, unplanned inventory change. Also our old friend, right? It's just income subtract the total expenditure. So do you remember what's the total expenditure? It's actually the right-hand side of this equation, right? So let's look at this and what does this mean? So on the right-hand side, as you can see, this is your aggregate expenditure, right? And Y is your income. So at the equilibrium, this equation holds. But how about if there's not equilibrium, like Y larger than AE or Y smaller than AE aggregate expenditure? It means when Y smaller than aggregate expenditure, it means your income is less than your total expenditure, right? So you need to borrow money to support the life. So this is the thing. So only at the equilibrium, the equation holds. Okay, and then the fourth and fifth question is actually very similar. It's based on MPC. So I assume you guys still remember the meaning of MPC. MPC is the marginal propensity to consume, right? from our last discussion. So now we need to know some multiplier. The first one is the tax multiplier equals negative MPC divided 1 minus MPC. So what does tax multiplier mean? It means that the influence of tax on the total output. So let's give you the example. So as we can see that this tax multiplier has to be a negative value, right? Because MPC belongs to 0 and 1. So this one positive, positive, negative. And how about suppose the tax multiplier is 5. If negative 5, it means $1 change of tax, it would be half delta y equals negative 5 times delta t. So delta y would decrease about 5 units. Okay, so this is measuring the influence of tax on the total output. Okay, corresponding to the tax multiplier, there's a government spending multiplier equals negative MPC, negative 1 over 1 minus M, or not negative. So this is the same mean. It is the influence of government expanding on Y. Okay, so if you know these 5 equations, I think you can solve the following questions smoothly. Okay, so let's look at the first question together. Let's erase this. Also, maybe give you another one because you may need to use it. The saving equals disposal Y subtract consumption. This is also can be understood based on your real life because after paying tax, there are 2 ways for you to use your money, right? Saving and consumption. So let's look at the first one. Now there's an economy that can be characterized by these 3 equations. So when we look at the first equation, then we can directly know that MPC equals 0.6, right? So this is the direct information, but we are not going to use it in this question. And we know T, we know Y. So the question is that at the equilibrium, what's the sum of consumption and government purchases? So when we look at YD, do you know what's YD? YD is Y subtract T, right? So you use Y subtract D to get YD, right? And after getting YD, you can substitute it to C, right? So now you can get the consumption equals to this value. And also, based on our equation 2, we know that at the equilibrium, the output is Y equals C and I and G. So now you know Y, you know C, then do you know the sum of investment and government spending? Yes, you will know it, right? You just substitute Y's value and C's value, then you will know the sum. Okay. And question 2 is actually the subpart of question 1. After getting C and YD, can you know saving? Yes, because this is our equation 6, right? You know C from question 1, right? You know YD from question 1. Then the rest part would be saving. Okay, so question 1 and 2 are using the equation in 1 to 6. Okay, Any questions? Any problems about the first question? Okay, if you have any questions, you can type in the chat box. Okay, just feel free to interrupt me. Okay, no tapped. Let's continue. Let's skip question 3 first because question 3 only about definition, and we'll deal with all the definition questions based on later. Okay. And so let's look at question 4. So don't be afraid when you look at such a big table, right? You can just like what I did. The first column is actually Y, right? Second column, consumption, C. This one, tax. This one, investment. This one, G. So now it would become easier because we know that, okay, now I know we are just going to use several equations and then get our answer. So when we answer question A, at an output level of 1,200 billion, so we just look at this row, right? 1,200 billion, and the level of the aggregate expenditure is what? Remember, what's the definition of aggregate expenditure? From our equation 2's right-hand side, right? C and I and G. Okay, so you only need to sum up C, I, and G for this rule. Then you will get your answer is 1,300. And also for B, what's the unplanned inventory change? Remember our equation 3, right? Our equation 3, unplanned inventory change is income subtract aggregate expenditure. So for this column, income is what? 1,200, right? And the aggregate expenditure is 1,300. So now I think you can get your answer for the unplanned inventory change of negative 100. Okay, so A and B are just use our equation 2 and 3. Okay, and also let's look at C. At output level of 2,000 billion, you are required to fill what's the aggregate expenditure, what's the unplanned inventory change. So I will not repeat it because it means you only need to look at this rule and using the same formula, same equation to get your answer, right? So the answer would be 1,900, and now the unplanned inventory change is 100. Okay. And for E, what's the equilibrium level of output? Remember, what does the equilibrium output mean? It means that when Y equals AE, it means when Y equals C and I and G. There's nothing special. You just need to try. You try different rule and to see which rule satisfy this equation. And you will know, okay, at this level, Y equals C plus I plus J equals 1,600. Okay, so there's nothing smart to solve this question. Just need to try different rule. Okay. For F, at an output level of 800 billion, disposal income equals to what? Okay, now we are going to use the equation 1, right? What's the disposal income? Just Y subtract T, right? So at this level, what's Y? 800. What's T? 100, right? So you can get the disposal income is just 700 billion. Okay. And for F, at an output level of 2000 billion. So we only look at this rule. What is the value of saving? So do you remember the savings equation from our equation 6, right? So let's look. Oh, this is G. Saving is Y, disposal Y, subtract consumption. And disposal Y is Y subtract T, right? So you only need to look at Y, T, and C. Y subtract T, subtract C. And the remaining part would be your saving, right? So the saving would be 300 billion. And for the last question, the output level is 1,200 billion. There's a tendency for output to what? So actually in this level, you need to calculate what's the unplanned inventory change. You will realize that the income is less than the aggregate expenditure. So there's a tendency for output to increase. Otherwise, there's no enough output to consume for saving for government spending. Okay, because you need to get the equilibrium, let Y equals aggregate expenditure. Okay, because question 4 is a long question. Do you have any problems? Okay, you can tap. Okay, no one tapped. Then very good. We can look at the next table. The next table is actually a little bit complex because in this part we need to calculate the multiplier that we demonstrate in our equation 4 and 5. Okay, so A, I will not introduce again. The equilibrium level of income, you only need to find what? To find Y equals C and I and G. And what's the marginal propensity to consume? Is negative none, right? Why? Because this is the direct information from here, right? So you just copied it. And see what's the value of tax multiplier? Our equation 4, right? Tax multiplier is negative MPC over 1 minus MPC. And now you know what's the MPC's value, right? Negative none. You just need to substitute to it to get the tax multiplier. Okay, so you will get this is negative none. Then we are going to use it. So for in the following question, but not in question D, okay? So let's look at D. D is actually you need to find the government spending multiplier first, and then go to then solve this equation. We'll solve this question. The economy is at the equilibrium level of output, so we only look at this rule. Okay, then if the government spending increased by 200 billion, what's the equilibrium level of output? Remember what the meaning of the government multiplier. It's the influence of G on the equilibrium Y, right? So now G increased by 200 billion. Then what's the equilibrium Y change? We need to get the government spending multiplier first, right? When you substitute MPC equals negative 9 to here, you will know the government spending multiplier is 10. So government spending multiplier is 10, and then delta G is what? Increase by 200 billion, right? So times 200 equals 2,000. Then the equilibrium Y also increased 2,000. And previously, the equilibrium is 3,600. So now the output level is 5,600 billion. Okay. For E, same logic. Delta Y is what? Delta Y equals 10 times delta G, right? And delta G is negative 50. So make sure you use the correct signal because for question D, the government spending increases, but in question E, the government spending decreases. Okay, so delta Y equals negative 500. So previously, the equilibrium is 3,600 and decrease 500. You will get the new equilibrium level is 3,100 billion. Okay. Okay, now we can look at question F. Question F is if the tax reduced from 100 billion to 550 billion. So same logic. Delta T, the tax decreases 50 billion. And what's the equilibrium level of output change? You just need to use delta Y equals the tax multiplier times delta T equals 450. So the new Y would be 3,600 plus 450, right? And G, actually question G is a little bit difficult because you need to consider the tax change and government change together. So there are two aspects of the equilibrium Y change because of the tax change or because of the government spending change. Okay, so for the tax change, again, you will know that the net influence of it is 450. And the government spending change will cause the equilibrium Y decreases 500 billion. So totally, the net influence on Y would be negative 50. 450 plus negative 500. So the new equilibrium would be here, right? So actually, it's just, right? So you can get the answer. So actually equation 5 is a little bit complex because sometimes you need to consider the multiplier first and then get your solution. Any problems? Let me see. Okay, very good. Then the following questions would be based on definition. So let's go back to question 3. Question 3, why there's no import and export? Because there's no foreign trade, right? So the answer is D. And question 6, also this is about the definition of the government purchases multiplier. The ratio of change in equilibrium level of output to a change government purchases. Okay. And actually for 7, 8, and 10, you are just using the equation of tax multiplier and government multiplier. So I can show you the correct answer, then you can practice by yourself. Okay. This is you just need to substitute these values to the multiplier, then get your answer. Okay. Also, for question 11 is about the multiplier. In this question, actually you need to calculate the tax multiplier equals to -1, government spending multiplier equals to 2 first, then get the answer C. Okay. And 12, M2's definition. Okay. You can find it in your textbook. And question 13, money's information. Question 14, we can look at this table first. And I will give you the another equation, this one. The reserve equals the reserve ratio times deposits. So Now you know the deposit is 800 and the reserve ratio is 25%, then you will get it 200, right? And another rule, total assets equals to total liability, right? So in this, you can get 1,200. Then what's the rest part of loans? It's just 1,000, right? Because this plus this equals to total, okay? So this is actually the accounting problem, but you need to know a little about this. And for question 15, so this is, remember, we emphasize the quantity demand, quantity supply, or demand supply change. So this shares the same logic because if there's an interest rate change only, then there's a movement along the curve. It is called the quantity money change. Then if there's something else, it will call a shift of this money curve. Okay. So let's look at A first. An increase in money demand will cause to what? So this is not about the figure. Increase in money demand would cause an increase in the normal, would cause by an increase in normal nominal income, because if your income level increases, then the liquidity of the money uh, is demanded. Okay. And suppose money demand is currently at A. Okay, at A, then a decrease in the interest rate. Remember, interest rate change would cause a change along the curve. So from A to C, right? So now it would be increase the quantity of money demanded from 100 billion to previous level 100 billion, new level 150 million. Million. Okay. And for C, suppose the money demand is currently at point D. Okay, at point D, a movement to point C. So actually this is about the shifting, right? It means at the same interest rate, the demand for money decreases. So what will cause it? Is actually may caused by a decrease in nominal income. So this is corresponding to question A. Okay, and question 6 is about the relationship between money and interest rate. This is easily to understand because suppose you are going to borrow money from bank, then the interest rate would be your cost, right? The interest payment. If the interest rate is higher than before, then you may lose the motivation to borrow money. So the demand for money and the interest rate would be negatively related. And question 17 is about the definition. The federal tax code is not used by the Federal Reserve to change the money supply, and all other A, C, and D are the tools to change the money supply. And the last question, which of the following will decide to decrease the money supply? So I'm going to tell you why it decreases the money supply. Suppose in the market, people are holding this amount of cash, right? Selling government securities in the open market means that people need to pay cash to government to purchase these government securities, right? So the cash will flow out. So it will cause the money, will decrease the money supply. So actually, option B is an important tool to decrease the money supply. and I think you can learn it from your textbook, right? Okay. We have finished this discussion. Do you have any questions? I'm going to stop recording.